On April 21st, 2016, it was a typical day for Bobby Jo Manley when she entered her sister's house to feed the pets. In actuality, she was unknowingly walking into the scene of one of the most gruesome massacres in history. Upon arrival, she immediately dialed 911 to inform authorities of 2 dead bodies inside the house. What was initially 2 bodies soon turned into 8 as the police and remaining family discovered more bodies sparse throughout different houses in town. All 8 members of the Rhoden family were shot to death execution style in a total of 4 different homes in Pike County, Ohio. 7 of them were adults and 1 was a 16-year-old boy. Specifically, the victims included the father Christopher Rhoden, 40, his older brother Kenneth Rhoden, 44, his cousin Gary Rhoden, and his former wife Dana Lynn Rhoden, 37, and their children Clarence Rhoden, who was 20, Hannah Mae Rhoden, 19, and Christopher Rhoden, 16, as well as Clarence's fiancée Hannah Gilley. All but 1 member was shot multiple times, with a total of 32 shots being fired. Only 3 young children were spared, aged 3 years, 6 months, and 4 days respectively. This created an immediate uproar within the community, and authorities warned the remaining Rhoden family members, as well as the entire town, to take cover. Just following this murder, another family known as the Wagners packed their bags and left to Alaska. The Wagners were a well-known and well-to-do family in Ohio, having built a strong entrepreneurship within the community and owned many of the properties in town. However, none of the locals were comfortable with them moving. In fact, most found their sudden departure actually quite suspicious, especially because there was a connection between the Rhodens and the Wagners. Edward Wagner, more commonly known as Jack Wagner, was an ex-boyfriend of Hannah Rhoden, who was killed, and also the father of their 3-year-old that was left unharmed. People suspected that they moved so that they could get out of the law enforcement's way as fast as possible, but this did the exact opposite. The following month, officials began the largest investigation in Ohio history. After labeling the Wagners as a prime suspect, they started to comb through their properties, and in 2017, they directly asked for more information from the Wagners, as well as the public, regarding any conversation about guns and vehicles they possibly had with them. Shockingly, after nearly 2 years, the Wagner family decided to come back to Ohio, with reasoning that seemed innocent on the surface. They said that a family member became sick, and because they were at risk of losing their Alaska home, they decided to come back to Ohio. For 2 to 3 weeks, no one knew about their return, but when the entire community soon realized they were back, everyone went haywire and began to verbally and even physically attack them, to the point of throwing entire glass bottles their way and violating their vehicles. Almost everybody in town just referred to them as the murderers. On the other hand, there were others who were baffled that the Wagners acted anything but guilty, because they were willingly cooperating with authorities. They not only gave their DNA samples, they also handed over laptops and conducted interviews, in which they said Jake moved because he wanted to give his daughter a better life. From that perspective, the Wagners looked innocent, and people began to question the ethics of the mayor and the officials for even publicly announcing the Wagners were suspects in the first place. Others openly inquired if the lead investigators in fact secretly knew something about the case that the public wasn't being told about. All doubts ceased in 2018, however, when investigators raided a farm previously owned by Jake and George Wagner and discovered something truly noteworthy. A homemade silencer was recovered from the bottom of the well. This was the last piece of evidence they needed to arrest all of them after a lengthy 2.5 years of investigations that required thousands of hours. On November 13, Angela, 48, Bill, 47, and their sons Jake, 26, and George, 27, were all arrested for the 8 murders. Additionally, the grandmothers of the family were also arrested, and they were Rita Newcomb and Frederica Wagner. Angela, Bill, Jake, and George Wagner were all charged with aggravated murder, and the grandmothers were charged with perjury, forging papers, and covering up the crime. It was believed that the motive for these heinous crimes arose from a custody dispute between Jake Wagner and Hannah Rhoden. Prosecutors stated that the Wagners were obsessed with having custody and control of the children, and these murders were premeditated. One of the grandmothers, specifically Rita, forged custody documentation that stated what would happen in the event both parents die. In 2021, Jake Wagner pled guilty to all 8 murders, including burglary and tampering with evidence. Subsequently, he entered a plea deal to testify against his family members to not get the death penalty. He admitted to killing 5 of the 8 victims and was sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences. He also testified that his brother George Wagner did not kill anyone, though the judge declined to throw out the aggravated murder charges against him. Angela, George, and her husband face several charges and are currently awaiting sentencing. The judge has specifically stated that the death penalty will not be dropped yet for the remaining members. I can't believe things like this even happen. On the surface, the Wagners just look like everyday people we see outside, but what they did was perhaps the most horrific, scary, and disgusting thing ever. Like something straight out of a horror movie. I mean, why would they do all of that just for custody? It just seems so ridiculous. Going through faking all the papers and literally shooting everybody while they were sleeping. Even asking the question why isn't enough in this case. I can't comprehend how 6 grown adults all consolidated with one another and thought that doing any of this would be okay. Did they think that they can just individually shoot each person from the same family that resided in separate places and no one would think anything of it? And when they temporarily moved to Alaska right after the murders, I mean, come on, how stupid do you have to be? I feel like the only reason they were complying with the authorities and came back to Ohio was so that they could create an innocent public image. But the locals still saw through those trifling people. What do you guys think about this massacre and the Wagners in general? Do you think it was right for the authorities to publicly announce that the Wagners were suspects, even long before their arrests? While their lawyers claim that doing so just allowed people to harass them, in my perspective, it's great that the Wagners were called out, because at the end, it was proven that they did indeed execute these murders. There is something amazing about human instincts and trusting our gut feelings. Most people thought the Wagners were suspect, and they turned out to be right. I look forward to reading your guys' thoughts in the comment section below, and please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting content.